But let me just talk about how we met and how we connected. Um, and we can start off there. So everyone, I want to introduce you to Doug Shannon. He is an automation pro. We chatted a week ago, and we hit it off when we were talking about AI, automation, when people should be thinking about automation versus AI. And so I thought it would be great to have him on the show and have a discussion about it. So, Doug, you want to say hi to everyone and introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Doug Shannon. So, yeah, I've a good, few years in automation, and I have a background in 20 years of IT and a good 4 to 5 years in project management. I bring in all of my background of IT and project management into the automation practice that I do. And yeah, I think using that with using agile methodology and Scrum is always a good feature to use and to bring in that effort and then iterate out on that. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy the talk.
Awesome. And Doug, I think a good place to start was is where we connected, and we had this conversation around people rushing to AI. Like I've been a part of a number of POCs, pilots, where we were trying to introduce AI or machine learning into a process for a particular company, and I had to tell folks that I didn't see an AI problem. What I saw is an automation problem or a digitization problem. I would find processes that were still paper and pen, and I said, hey, that's probably a better place to start is digitizing this process,
Yeah.
creating some sort of UI or application so that your operators aren't just focused on this manual thing. Like you don't have an AI problem, you have a digitization problem, or oftentimes it's an automation problem. You need to automate a particular routine task for an operator. So I'm wondering if you've seen that in your career as well, and if so, why is that the case?
Yeah, so in most businesses, we've all seen a lot of what you just described. There's huge gaps in documentation. There's huge gaps in just tribal knowledge that ends up going with individuals. Either like they have tribal knowledge in their team and then they move teams or they leave the company. All of those things come into play. And when it comes down to what's the best solution, when you're looking at automation, you do need like business process mapping, right? You need the users, you need the business users to understand what is a process, and then how do you document that process, and then all of that really starts the journey on digitization and digitalization, right? Like the overall like making your data digital, and then once it's digital, how do you implement that? And so there's a whole life cycle there, and that really feeds into automation because you need those standard repeatable tasks. You need to know where the data is coming from. Is it clean data? Is it the same process? A lot of teams you find, 4 or 5 people on a team and they do it 4 or 5 different ways. And so if you can streamline that, control those variables, that's going to really feed into your automation.
That's a good point. I really like the fact that you mentioned clean data and having a consistent workflow, because oftentimes data science and machine learning work is downstream of all the data collecting and the data modification. And we're assuming that the data has been processed in the same way every time. And if there's been a
Right.
little bit of change to that, that can really throw off our analysis.
Yeah, 100%, right? So that's where when I've talked to different people in the AI space, they take an overall like, business ask, right? And then they say, how do we build that out? How do we build the overall large data sets, the reliability, the accuracy in that data? And then they scope it out for that. But then 6 months later, they find out that's no longer the case. Their model's dead. They're not able to reproduce the same results. Even with the test data, they try to pull that in. So what happens is we need to kind of turn it on its head and say, hey, where's the data coming from? It's coming from users. It's coming from business people that don't understand the end result. And so that's why even in automation and how I draw that back is, you have RPA and then I try to like separate them out. So there's RPA, there's automation, and then there's intelligent automation. And really the best way to look at that is that it's the same tool at different histories within the business. So when you have RPA, you're looking at just finding something that's out there that is going to just achieve like results, like just ROI. You're going to automate as is. You're going to automate like the low hanging fruit, and that's what RPA is going to do. It can be used as a band aid. It does do some other things. Some people say that, hey, RPA is dead. Well, it's not. It depends on where you are in the journey. But RPA definitely leads into automation. And automation is when you have some of those clean data sets and you have some of that clean understanding where those processes are coming from, you can actually build in automation. You can streamline teams' efforts. You can streamline whole, like in general, like organizational parts, so that then it's just more efficient. And then you get more quality data. You start to control those variables. And then again, going back to the three different ways of that historical timeline, when you move into intelligent automation, you need those controlled variables. You need that data set. You need the repeatability, the accuracy, the quality of it. And once you can do intelligent automation, I mean, you're on the way to AI at that point. And that's why kind of we're having this conversation, right? It's a matter of how do you get to AI, and how do you maintain that? You do that by building in better quality, but you have to go down to the level that we're talking about right now. At least that's from my perspective.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So RPA, that leads to automation, and that leads to intelligent automation.
Yeah.
And then that's when we're talking about AI and machine learning contributing in a meaningful way.
Yep.
Is there an example that comes to mind? So, like, say for example, I'm at a hospital. RPA, would that be me taking figures from a chart and putting it in different systems? And then is automation then um, automatically coding that information within the system? And then is intelligent automation some sort of smart billing type of function? Is that a decent representation of each one of those levels?
Yeah, I would almost. I mean, hospitals is hard because healthcare has not changed a lot in the last forever. But I would almost use like the self-driving cars almost for an example. So you have a car, and we all know how to drive a car, and then they move away from that. And then originally it was, hey, we have maps and we have GPS. We're taking pictures, like Google did. So before they did anything, they took pictures of all the roads. They literally had humans driving, mapping out the process, mapping out the roads. They then based the logic off of normal road signs because there's very much static and very standardized rules. Like a stop sign, you stop. A red light, you stop as well. So once you build out your mapping, you get your foundation. You take the pictures you need to take to really just build it out, and then you have that mapping you put on top of it. And then the hardest part there was then like computational power, right? So and that's where AI comes in as well. It's like you need to be able to have the ability to buy the servers, to buy the things needed to actually build out to that. But how do you get that funding? And a lot of companies don't look at how much it's going to cost. And so when you go back down to the automation route, you say, oh, well, if we automate a lot of these, we're building in that ROI. If you automate a lot of these, we're synergizing and really building efficiencies within our own company so that we can effectively move with the changes in the market. We can effectively pivot when we need to if something bad happens. And so that gives a lot more resiliency and even some fault tolerance in there so that when you're able to go to AI, you have that built in. You're again, like you're controlling the variables.
That makes a lot of sense. No, I think I like automation as a sort of early steps for an organization before getting to AI. You're using some of the same methodologies in terms of agile. You mentioned that it's the same type of process for AI and machine learning, but it's also making sure that you have the necessary infrastructure in place so that when you do deploy an AI model or a data science model to production, that you're going to have a repeatable result off of that model. And again, I always think yeah, data science tends to be downstream of the business. So to the extent that that's all controlled and consistent, it's going to be better for us.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit more about how automation and AI would look like in an ideal organization? We had a conversation previously where you were talking about how one pipeline might just be focused on cleaning the data, and that would be your main workflow. But then over time, you would try to sprinkle AI across different parts of that workflow to get a better outcome. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when you're building AI and even like intelligent automation and like building AI, you have those large data sets. So a lot of people go to automation because it's resilient. It's because you can edit things. It's not the classic. I'm going to put in a very long Python code. I'm going to go and type up a whole thing, develop it out, and then something changes. There's an edit, or now the business goes to a different website, or now the business goes from like WebEx to like MS Teams. How do you deal with that change? And when you have the classic way of developing, it's a lot of code to go back and redo the whole thing. However, with automation and the way that certain vendors have built it out with orchestration and dealing with assets, you have the ability to, on the fly, like three to five clicks, I can go in and change the website that bot or process is going to. So when you have that in place early on, and then you have your AI or your intelligent automation long-ended processes pulling from those initial data sets, if there is a change, you can change it. And then the AI or the intelligent automation already knows, hey, I'm pulling from that anyway. So whatever it says is whatever it is. And it's more accurate that way. Because again, like, you're controlling the variables and you're setting that up. The other thing within organizations that it's good to talk to is, I've never seen a highly successful automation group or an AI group of people that I've talked to without having like a center of excellence or a COE, right? So the way that I usually try to explain it out is due to like RPA or automation. Without a COE, it'll give you results. Like, you'll get ROI, you'll get your minor results, you'll get your low hanging fruit. But what you don't see and what you don't get unless you use a COE is your COE is going to drive outcomes. So they're more future focused. So it's a difference between results and outcomes. And most companies, they don't look to the future. And then when they try to, they don't see like, oh, maybe the team needs to learn. Maybe this COE group needs to see the overall environment. And even going into that is these organizations and these companies, they're all different. They all have different cultures. They all have different backgrounds. They have different ways that they started their own businesses and histories behind that. And so there's not exactly like bias that we talk about in AI and whatnot, but there's overall just a difference of opinion, a difference in perspective. And all of those things are very much easily more found out through automation than, coming at it from the other side of the scope of the AI and building out those data sets and looking for those things. Because when you look at a very large view, you miss those cultural cues.
And those are absolutely important. Having deployed AI solutions, I tell you, one of the first things I'm doing is I'm talking to the operators on the ground floor. I'm trying to understand the context. I'm trying to understand how everything was input into the system, because it's so easy to miss a lot of that from the corporate office.
Yeah.
I got a comment here. Love the description on how you see the different technologies in the broader automation space. So RPA to automation to intelligent automation. I think that was very well laid out. There's a question here. What have you seen working in terms of getting users onboarded with automation and with more advanced automation technologies? You want to take that, Doug?
Yeah. So automation in general, there's a common disputed way to look at it, right? So you have your ground up approach or grassroots approach, and then you have your top down leadership approach. A lot of folks and teams will say, hey, as long as you have leadership support and backing of the business, you'll be fine. That's not always the case, because if you don't get traction and you're not making headway or gaining that ROI, the business will very shortly turn on you and you won't have backing at that point. So usually the ground up approach does work really well. Yes, you do need leadership support. You do need everyone to kind of buy into it, but it goes back to like the cultural aspect. How do you make a cultural change? How do you do it in real life? How do you do it like with humans? It's hard. Cultural change takes a long time. But when you take in automation and you're taking literally those stressful things that your employees are doing every day, and you're removing the stress. You're removing those processes that they have to do every day, every week, and they go to work and go, really, I have to do that TPS report again? I don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that. So if you can automate that, their life gets easier. And then there's the fact that like they become happier in some cases. A lot of times, going the ground up or the grassroots approach, you find that when you do make them happier, they do, employees have the ability to then innovate because they're not busy anymore. I think one of the pictures I've used in the past, and I've seen it around other places as well, is like you have the Lego guys pushing a cart with square wheels, and then there's a guy with two round wheels and says, hey, I can automate that for you, and they're too busy saying, I'm too busy, we don't have time to stop, we have to keep pushing this square cart. So that's the issue, right? It's if you can automate a few and kind of just keep on going, what happens is the employees themselves say, we want more of this. And then if you be embolden them to say, hey, I've worked with you. You've now saved this much money, this much effort, this much ROI. Tell that to your, bosses. Everybody wins. They go, hey, I saved a bunch of money. You say, hey, we helped save a bunch of money. And then overall, they tell their friends. Other people tell their friends, and then you almost get like a fear of missing out approach,
Mm.
because somebody goes, hey, I won, how about you? And they go, I want to go win too. How did you do that? How do you contact those the COE group, and how do you work with them? And then it literally just like starts to trickle in. But again, that all drives, and it's a very faster approach than what you would see like with like trying to develop like AI and whatnot. You're going to see it's more visual, it's more attainable, and you're making people happy. And so when you're making people happy, that cultural change comes quickly.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. I guess that also works in part because there is some apprehension when it comes to automation, especially with operators.
Yeah.
So, they fear that their job is going to be automated away. But I guess what you're showing is like, no, we're just going to do away with some of the more mundane tasks of your job so that you can focus on higher value, more creative, more fulfilling parts of your job.
Yeah, I mean, it does. Some of that does depend on the leadership. So you want leaders to embolden their employees to save time and have more time to innovate and have more time to look for other innovations or other processes. Once you automate one and they have some of that time back, they can look for others. If you have leadership that is not aligned and does want to replace people, I don't recommend it, because you're literally going to shoot your automation effort in the foot. So embrace the fact that we're trying to do more for our customers, our employees, and overall build that better, synergy efficiency between everyone, so that the business at a whole becomes more successful.
When companies are rolling out successful automation efforts, what are they doing well in some of the better instances that you've seen?
So what are they doing well? So the I mean, it kind of talks around the same line of logic. There is they see that classic project management, classic, let's get it done, follow the sun type of methodology. There's a lot of differences, or maybe they have. I think some of the most successful is would be example of that would be. Uh, Seasonal work, right? So you have seasonal work. You have people that come in. Your businesses scale up and they scale down. They ebb and flow. Every business has something like that. If you can take that process, because it's already a process, because you're literally training new hires to do this function, that is something then you may not need to bring on that many more people the next time around. And so it's an instant business win, and it's also a very good way to showcase, hey, this is what we can do. So it's a quick win for most automation, and in general, most businesses can see that result fairly quickly.
Got it, got it. And then how about pitfalls? What are some of the pitfalls that companies are running into as they're trying to roll out these technologies?
Yeah, so the biggest pitfalls in automation, even in AI, are the is sometimes just the visibility or perspective of the stakeholders that are involved. So a lot of times you know, you as a team member, you as a business leader may feel pain. You're like, hey, I have a pain point. I would like to fix this pain point. Although that pain point may be way too big at this point to take on. So a lot of times stakeholders say, no, 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 I really want to focus on this. And then if you have an automation expert or someone that understands like the history and knows how things work, they may say, let's not touch that one because that's like a 6 month, 8 month, could be even longer depending on how much, do we have the right domain knowledge? Do we have the right people involved? Is the systems and the infrastructure even set up yet? Are you bringing in the COE from zero? Like what are the situations here? So having a large delay is a huge pitfall because then again, all that does is eat away at the credibility. It eats away at the actual overall effort that you're trying to produce as an automation team. And then the business is saying, why are we putting this much money into something that's taking like 8 months to a year to deploy?
Yes, that totally is a case for AI and machine learning, is scoping the project right and
Yeah.
not having it be this big bogged down initiative. I really like this concept of getting a small win. I know, it's kind of
Yeah.
cliche at this point, but for new technologies, I keep reminding my clients that we're trying to build trust within an organization for this new technology. And one of the best ways to do that is to show positive outcomes in a very short period of time. And for AI and for machine learning, there's a lot of skepticism like, oh, yeah, we've seen this before. Like we tried it 5 years ago, it didn't work. And so you can sit there and do a ton of presentations on why that's no longer the case. Or you can go and build a model that shows some very interesting results and you have operators sign off on it and say, hey, this would be super valuable if we had this in production. That to me is a much more compelling way of winning that internal argument.
Yeah, I mean, with automation with AI, it's all about trust, right? So there's a huge trust with your infrastructure, your internal IT teams, your leadership, your even your users. They most of the you got to think about like the age and the generation of the employees that we're working with, right? Most of us were born in the 80s. And what was going on in the 80s? We had Ghostbusters, we had Terminator, we had all these things of all these like computers coming to take over and ruining everything that we thought was normal. So they have some bias. They have some like fear. And then when it comes down to, hey, how do we handle that? We have to defeat some of those myths, right? And how best to show them that is it's not scary. It will stop if something happens. It isn't going to go off and do something that we didn't tell it to do. So yeah, and
Uh,
that's again why you start from the basics, right? You start from automation because you're controlling those variables. And later on when AI does have the ability to make a choice, do a thing, choose a different direction, it's still based off those initial first lines. So then it does make sense.
right, and you're cashing in on goodwill with that operator, with that manager, because you've given some of their time back to them.
Yep.
Um, what does an RPA practice within a mature organization look like? Is that a standalone department, or are they a part of the analytics team or the IT team?
Yeah, it is. That's highly debated. So I've seen there's usually three type of like typologies that are going on. The most successful I've seen is if you have an internal organization and an internal COE that kind of maintains everything, because then they are the middleman or middle group to handle like IT infrastructure, data security, infosec, SOX, like your audit stuff. And having that gives you more visibility for maintenance and control, for future site. What do we need to build towards? Maybe we don't have the right technology. Maybe we can go get the right technology. So then you involve those leaders and those IT professionals, and then everybody kind of works as a team because again, you're building that loyalty and you're building that understanding of trust. Because you should also be building like change controls and governance that everyone goes, hey, we agree with that. Like, let's go that route. Now, other ways I've seen are they're called like rocks, so it's like robot operation centers. So then your larger groups, like your finance and your HR, may have their own internalized automation centers. But then it does get back to the issue, like, are they communicating? Are you just siloing out yourself even more? Are you creating shadow IT from the get-go? So I would avoid those. There's also the ability to, there's a lot of companies that have decided to either use automation as a service or bot on demand. Those are all great if you can get the right deals and make sure you understand what's going on. But I still recommend having someone that understands the technology, because that person is going to be your driver, or like, as I say, like, who's driving the boat? Like, if nobody's driving the boat, how are these partners working with you? They're not driving your boat, and if they are, what's the skin in the game there? Are they just making money, or do they want to see you succeed? So there's that. But one of the other way is, like, instead of, you definitely have to have a COE, because of, without that, again, like, no one's driving the boat. But you can, with a COE, still engage with third party partners, or some of the big individual companies that are out there, because then you have someone internally that is beholden to the company, that understands what the issues are, understands what the goals are, knows the long tent poles and where to go and whatnot. So they can deliver with those third party partners and kind of utilize them as needed, or bring it up and bring it down, or scale, to the fact that if there's more deliverables that need to be done, or if there's something that came up that you don't have enough internal, firepower or people to handle, you can always scale out, outsource it.
What are so do you recommend a center of excellence COE to as a jumping off point? And even if you're larger and have embedded teams within different divisions, you still want one COE driving the boat, so to speak, and quarterbacking all the various initiatives.
Yeah, so there's a lot of companies that also, especially looking at automation, there's a lot of talk about, like, citizen developers, for example, and in that, how do you manage the citizen developers if you don't have a group managing the effort? And you can say, hey, they can work and they can go do their own thing. That's great, but then you have, again, five people on one team and five people on another team potentially creating the same automation. So why waste the time when they can come to your COE and say, hey, we all want this thing? The COE can then actually utilize their services, create it, create a component for it, and then pass it on along to everybody that needs it. Or say, hey, finance, you need this one. This will tie into all of your SharePoint, all of your OneDrive, and do everything you need here, while, like, your HR team needs different setups. So you can literally build it out that way, control it out that way, so that you don't have, users with admin rights doing random things and connecting to databases.
Right. It's there's a spectrum of activities that a COE might have.
Yeah.
It can range from doing all of the development work. So you have like a group of automation engineers and they get deployed into a department. They do all the work and they come back to the COE. And that's sort of a heavy approach. Or it can be a more lightweight approach where the COE is just looking to set up best practices, looking to connect different automation engineers across the organization and share use cases and things of that nature. So it
Yeah.
can vary.
Yeah, and many of the vendors out there provide different formats to enable basically community usage, community, like, support, or say, like, hey, I have a thing, here's my business need, and then you can kind of get driving forces beneath that and say, oh, all of you need this, great, let's go make that for you, and then provide that to them, like in a portal or in a different kind of way, to where it's deployed onto their system, for example, or API calls, all kinds of things.
It seems like in terms of making the business case for automation, that seems pretty straightforward. Like there's there'd be an easy way to calculate that upside, fairly straightforward to calculate the cost and then the ROI. Is that my misconception, or
Yeah,
is there more nuance there?
you would think it would be very easy. However, I mean, I've seen it easy. I've made it easy on myself in the past, but it is hard. It's hard because we all make different amounts of money. We all have different roles and different seniorities, and we've been there longer or shorter, and so nobody is making the same amount of money. So it is hard If you want to be very minute and very accurate and myopic in your view and say, I want to, this automation was built, it had this person that was there, and then we automated it, and then now it's automated, we saved this much money. That's great, but the issue is if that person leaves, if they move on to their team, well, then that's not the same amount anymore. So my recommendation is I never recommend to talk about FTEs. I try to avoid it like the plague. Never. I usually tell people of other teams, don't say that you're automating FTE hours or FTE people, because we want to separate people from hours. We don't want to say we're automating people. We're enabling people. We want to be enable them. We want to inspire them. And so I talk to strictly hours. This process takes how many hours to run? Okay, great. It's like 6 hours. Fine. Now that price point is, let's try to find out in general within your own company, any organization, what's the general like number that your average customer employee makes. Let's say it's like $50 an hour, right? So then every automation would be tiered by that number. And that makes it a much easier conversation to say, this process saves 6 hours, 6 times 50 is this is my savings. Now, whether or not that person leaves, whether or not the person gets hired on, it's probably around the same amount of money. So if you, and then talking to hours versus FTEs, you're not scaring people. So yeah.
That's a good tip. So avoid FTE and talk about hours.
Yes.
And how good is your estimate in terms of how many hours you're going to be able to save before you start a project? Is that do you tend to be pretty spot
Yeah.
on? Is that pretty straightforward to calculate, or is there something I'm missing there too?
Yeah, that's part of the scoping, right? So overall, within any of the different organizations or vendors, they usually say like create PDDs and STDs, and PDDs like a process documentation to understand like the overall process. So you have like the users you're working with, or the business users, create and take pictures and do their process. Like, hey, I do this, I click this, I do this thing. The STD is the solution design document, as we're essentially like your developer, because even internally to the RPA teams or automation teams, your teams can move. You could lose a developer, you can gain a developer, and then so how do you support that automation that was already created? Well, you use the STD because that developer created it and said, here's how I built this automation. If we need to fix it, if we need to enhance it, it's all there. What I tend to lean on is, I also, to get to the answer that you were asking for, is I lean towards like getting like a PQD, which is like a process questionnaire. So it's a more along the lines of basic questions to understand what is the process, how long does it take, how long does it take a human to do to get the job done. The accuracy of that is actually fairly high. What we find out though in dealing with automation, which you also find out in dealing with AI, is that before and after is always different. And so when you automate it, what you find out is the users go, hey, we used to run that once a week, but the bot can run 24 hours a day, right? Same thing with like AI. And they say, can we run it every day? Like, we can run it every day, but what is that going to do? And they're like, well, that's going to provide us more data, more faster, more effectively. We can actually make different data models now. We can actually act on the data that we're looking at. And you're like, that's amazing. Well, that 6 hours just turned into like 36 hours. And so that's the difference you would see. So is it accurate? Yes. Does it change? 100%, depending on the day, right? And if it doesn't change, then you go back and you build like an enhancement, or you come back and you say, how can we make that better? Or maybe you bring in a new technology to say, how do we make the interaction better? Because at the end of the day, we're still working for the employees. We're still working for those customers of ours or our customers, and we're trying to make their lives easier.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you free up people's time, and they say they want to increase the throughput. So you have other challenges to deal with.
Yep.
What are some of the biggest pain points that automation engineers are facing today within an organization, and that's keeping them from doing their best work?
The biggest things, it goes back to the basics. It goes back to, if organizations want to start anywhere, before they even look at automation, before they even look at AI, they need to get their processes documented. They need to talk to
Hmm.
their people, their employees, and say, hey, there's a thing called business process mapping.
Yes.
And here's how we do that. And then that should be stuff that your BSAs, your BAs, your PMO office, or your project manager office should be pushing down and saying, here's how we can help you. Like, because business process mapping helps everyone. It helps out projects. It helps out understanding what's out there in the environment. It helps to understand what applications are actually being touched. It helps IT go, hey, is this actually being used? Can we save licenses? Do we even touch, Visio anymore, or did we move on to something else? So that's the baseline. And then once you have that, you can actually take action on that. And then it's a matter of making sure that even those teams keep that up to date. Did the process change? Is there a new widget add-on? Did we go from one ERP system to another ERP system? And in that, is it the same process? It's probably not. Let's go remap that, because at in the end result, if there was intelligent automation or AI built down the line, it's not going to work if they don't update it, as long as everything's being pulled right. But you would see that early on. If you have a COE again, they would see that disconnect, and they would get the notifications from the bots to go, oh, something's wrong here. There's a change. There's an edit. Something changed. Like somebody filed a utility patent and changed, the way SharePoint works again. So then now you have to change that button. So all that could be impacted. But at least if you have the later on, the longer end processes, the intelligent automation, the potential AI, you're going to see it before it gets down to something that could cause some other kind of issue. So you have that middleman again.
Got it. So if you start a project and the client or the internal group, they already have all of their business processes mapped out, it's updated. The last time you made changes, you're like super happy with them. You're like really
Yeah.
like you're hugging the manager there.
Yeah. You're like, you're our people. Anything you need, we got you.
We're getting drinks after this for
Yeah.
sure. Very. I find like for as I start projects, we do a fair amount of business mapping for our projects because we need that context in
Yeah.
order to figure out what we're going to be doing from a data science and machine learning perspective.
Yeah.
And you're right. I oftentimes find like I'm very surprised as to how little people know about the overall process. How little of a systems thinking approach is being used with some of these companies, and it tends to be very surprising. I'm very surprised. Do you have a sense of why that is? It seems like it's very important. Why is it that managers are so hesitant to do that?
Uh, I think that goes back to just people don't know potentially, right? They
Yeah.
don't know. They don't. It's classic businesses, or even classic IT. Like I said, I have 20 years plus of IT experience, and working with some of the original IT folks that I grew up with. It was very much like, this is my stuff. Don't touch it. I don't want to document anything. Don't talk to me. I'm the only one
Yes.
that knows this. And I try and never, like, that's something I always avoid. I document as much as possible, provide that to the teams, even in automation. Like I said, like we have these standards that we utilize. We have these PQDs, these PDDs, these SDDs, these standards that end up providing value back, and they end up telling the story. And by telling the story, everybody understands the story. And if you don't, then you lose sight of that. And so managers they either don't know, or they don't know how to act, or they don't know how to embed themselves, or work around that. And so nobody wants to be the first person to put their hand up and ask a question, because they feel, as humans, like we feel dumb, so we don't want to feel dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. There's a comment here that was posted earlier when we were talking about healthcare. Thankfully, all the consolidation in healthcare EMR space is helping. EMR interoperability is the next step. I know we chatted a little bit about that. You want to talk about what you're looking forward to in respects to what's going to be happening in the healthcare space?
Yeah, so talking to people at the different platforms and whatnot, there's a lot of talk going on around like these fire servers, which are FHIR servers. And so that is something that's been, spun up by, like, on the college scene, and then kind of put together. And then now it's really, after some many years of work, even companies like Epic are getting involved. And so the idea here is to really have that data be usable and very clean, so you don't have your HIPAA and your PII information in there, but you have general information around like potential patients and other stuff that people and groups can actually share between companies or share between systems, so that you can actually make designs and data analysis around it, almost like retrieving the metadata to understand the overall ask, or see what other kind of correlations you're getting.
Neat. And so then, how would I see that as a consumer? Is it that, I'm no longer going to have to fill out the same form every time I go to a new service provider? Because I feel like that is like so painful. Not painful,
Uh,
but it's kind of a little bit annoying to have to do every time.
yeah, it could help with that. I mean, there's lots of ways that they can do it to where you separate the data, right? You have your data that has all of like your information. It has Manny, and here's where he lives, and this is what he does. But then they can have that removed, and then they can have like a specific, very long generated key that can then pull that back if they needed to. And so essentially, you would put in your name, you would put in your social or something, and then it would be able to generate all the rest of that potentially. So there's a future of that to where all of our data can be synced, all of our data can be utilized, and if you go overseas or if you go take travel and then you're in somewhere you're not really supported, well, all your information is still there, so at least you can actually be taken care of.
Got it. Any other benefits that we would see as consumers?
I mean, there's benefits of data benefits, right? So when you talk about data and you normalize the data overall, there's definitely some keen insights you can gain or glean from that data. If there's something major going on in an area, or you see all, in a specific zip code, all these 30-year-olds having issues, you don't know who they are. You don't know exactly what their addresses are. In a zip code that there's some people and there's an issue, and you're like, hey, we might want to look into that.
Interesting. So it's almost like there's all these data pools that are spread across these different organizations. Right now, they can't share that data because of privacy laws, but using this new API framework, that potentially there is a way to be able to pull that data and share it and have it in one place such that we can glean some insights and help patients and folks.
Yeah, it's like the same kind of aspect of when you saw when like the firefighters and the police and Homeland Defense, like all these organizations start interconnecting. When that happened, you get more information faster, and so the same thing hasn't happened in the healthcare space, but if it does, it's going to be really great.
That's very neat. And when do you anticipate that rolling out? When do you think we'll start seeing some tangible wins there?
We're supposed to find out something like before November, but so we should be seeing some very soon.
Cool. There's another comment here from Chris. Chris is in the healthcare space, so he knows a lot about this. Epic, IBM, Teladoc support legislation to modernize health privacy laws.
Yeah, that's probably in regards to, so in general, there like each state, each country has their own rules and laws. FDA has their laws. There's overall and overarching laws in different areas. So using and utilizing the data, you have the ability to actually control a lot of that and kind of maintain that, so your quality gets better. So it's kind of like the classic case of, you go in for a hand surgery, but then they chop off your leg. So they're going to have better knowledge of that. You could even look to build in blockchain technology and say, where's the running ledger? Is that the right person? Oh, it is the right person, and have actually monitoring systems check in to say, yeah, it is that person. So
Very neat. Any other trends that you're paying attention to, that you're looking that you're keeping abreast on in terms of automation, RPA?
trend wise, I mean, yeah, I think the biggest trend is kind of what we're speaking to is trying to get there's a lot of newcomers to automation. There's a lot of newcomers to AI. And then what I speak to on LinkedIn is really trying to help people see what is that journey. How do you start that journey? Because everybody out there, there's no book yet. There's no overarching like, here's the process. Go do this thing. This works for everyone, because it doesn't. And so that's where I started talking to like, hey, it's a culture fit. It's a finding out what that is. It's working with those teams and building up from scratch. In a way, you're still using vendors and still using information and technology that's available, but building in a way to where you can actually be successful.
Gotcha. And is that for up and coming automation engineers, or are you targeting leaders within organizations?
I mean, the stuff that I write to is mainly talking to either individual teams that are coming up or just people that reach out, and then we talk about things. So there's different groups and councils I'm part of, and we all tend to want to be successful because that's what we all want to do. It's why we're in the space, and so it's a matter of gaining traction and showing how best to have those results, and then providing details around that, and really just staying abreast of like what's going on because things change a lot. Like I was mentioning, like there's bots as a service, there's automation as a service, and so some of these things come in, and it can change how some of things interact. But overall, in the end, it's still the same result. Is like you're looking to build automation, and why are you looking to build automation? And that answer is to either be more effective, or to build better quality, or again to look at ROI, like the whole return on investment.
Do you have favorite resources, or a recommended path you would suggest to someone that is new to automation RPA? Like I'm thinking of like a recent grad, engineering background, relatively bright, wants to be an automation engineer. That's what the focus. That's what the focus is going to be. Where do you in what direction do you point them in?
Yeah, the what I've recommended to friends in that same scenario is essentially the way that so I use UiPath most of the time, and usually the reason why is to answer this question is the same reason why I would recommend UiPath to them is because when they came out as one of the automation leaders, they did so in a way by saying, here's all of the information. So they have a university, they have a catalog, you can get certified. It's all free. So in that, like you can literally get right out of college, go take some certifications, get spun up, and then like you can make 120 a year. Like there's a lot of opportunity there because there's especially here in the United States because the automation space and the AI space is booming here right now. And so although a automation's been big in Europe, there's a lot of momentum in general to the United States to kind of enable what that looks like. And so there are people looking for people in the United States to actually do the work.
Gotcha. So UiPath, you like them. I know they're one of the more popular automation vendors. The other one is Automation Anywhere and Blue
Blue
Automation.
Prism.
Yeah, Anywhere and Blue Prism, right?
Yeah.
But you like UiPath because they put such an emphasis on education and training, and they make a lot of that available for free and readily available.
Yeah, there's other reasons too. There's like the orchestration aspect of it. There's the fact that they utilize assets, and so it's easier to control and handle some of those moving parts and those variables, right? So some of the other ones don't have that. Um, things like Power Automate, Microsoft has that. They don't have orchestration, and so it makes it a little bit harder to kind of control what's going on.
Gotcha. So would you say that UiPath is sort of the lingua franca of automation right now? Is that like the one that everybody just has to know if you're kind of going into the marketplace in general?
Uh, No, I mean I've seen successful things come out of Automation Anywhere. I've seen very successful organizations do stuff in Blue Prism, and it's just my preference because that's what I kind of like cut my teeth on was UiPath. And but out of choosing out of all of them, I chose that one because of the knowledge.
Have you seen anybody be successful at bridging the or combining the skills of automation and AI? Is there like an automation engineer that's also a really good data scientist, or is that like a super unicorn?
That there is yeah, that's a super unicorn. There's some interesting stuff. There's some interesting people out there right now working on some very interesting ideas. Kind of a buddy of mine at Microsoft just talked about one, but I'll have to look more into it. I don't know if he's ready to come out with it, but it looks really interesting how things are kind of mapping out.
Neat. Okay. Well, if you share it, we'll include it in the show notes for everyone. Doug, any last thoughts? Any last comments you want to share?
I don't know. I guess the big stuff is just like, hey, if I try to like just the stuff I do on LinkedIn, it's like I try to provide information, and if anybody needs help with anything, I try to see what I can do, and yeah. Overall, I think I think the future is bright. Automation and AI is not going anywhere. It's driving, it's moving, it's causing that disruption that we're all kind of looking to see from it. It's just a matter of how we can implement it and where it goes next.
Very neat. And is LinkedIn the best place for people to connect with you, or do you also have a website? Are you active on Twitter?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best. I try not to get on too much social media because it takes too much time.
Gotcha. So LinkedIn is the best place to find you, and we'll be sure to include that in the show notes. Okay. Hey, Doug, thanks for coming on the show. I enjoyed our conversation about automation and
Yep.
AI, and I'm sure we'll have more to say on social media. And I hope we could do this again sometime.
Yeah, thanks, Manny. I appreciate it.
All right. Goodbye.